whether you're dealing with a resident that's being a pill or, or whatever, you never want to leave someone without their dignity. Mm-hmm. There's no point in that. You might need to make a point, but you don't need to make a point to where they have lost any shred of dignity in the transaction. And you really don't need to do that. And there's even times where I'll say, look, I'm not here to beat you up. I'm really not. I just need to make sure you understand where my position is.
Welcome to Racking Up Rentals, a show about how regular people, those of us without huge war chests of capital or insider connections, can build lasting wealth acquiring a portfolio of buy and hold real estate. But we don't just go mainstream looking at what's on the market and asking banks for loans, nor are we posting "We Buy Houses" signs or just looking for, quote, motivated sellers to make lowball offers to. You see, we are people-oriented deal makers. We sit down directly with sellers to work out win-win deals without agents or any other obstacles and buy properties nobody else even knows are for sale. I'm Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur. If you're the kind of real estate investor who wants long-term wealth, not get-rich-quick gimmicks or pictures of yourself holding fat checks on social media, this show is for you. Join me and quietly become the wealthiest person on your block. Now let's go rack up a rental portfolio. Hey, thanks for joining me for another episode of Racking Up Rentals. Show notes for this episode can be found at www.thoughtfulre.com/E91. Hey, please do us a big favor by hitting the subscribe button in the podcast app. That'd be fantastic. I'd really appreciate that. And it really does help other fellow thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs to find the show. Onward with today's episode. And in today's episode, I've got a great interview with Mark Dolfini. He is known as the Landlord Coach. And one thing I quickly realized when I learned about Mark is that his approach to managing properties is very, I would say, philosophically and spiritually perhaps even aligned with our approach to acquiring properties, thoughtfully, with a people-oriented approach, etc. So I really felt like there was great alignment between his way of doing things and ours, because the truth is, if we're out there racking up rentals, we're going to have to start managing those rentals that we are racking up. So I won't keep you from this interview for too long here, but I think you're really going to enjoy this. So let's dive right in to this interview with Mark Dolfini from Landlord Coach. Okay, Mark, thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, it's really good to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, it's funny. We haven't known each other long, like not at all, but I think I probably speak for both of us when I say we definitely feel like there's a lot of alignment between, your approach and my approach. And so I guess my question is, I'm guessing, like me, you weren't born into the world with your current state of enlightenment about the right way to do all things related to real estate entrepreneurship and property management. So tell us, how did you get to this point where you are now?
Yeah, I would love to say I had this golden moment where I woke up one morning and was like, wow, yeah, I want to be, have a bunch of real estate that runs seamlessly and the birds come and deliver me a bagel in the morning before I get out of bed and all that stuff. Yeah, that might be your plan, but generally God's plan is usually a little bit bumpier along the way. But no, honestly, it was, I started with an interest in real estate back when I was in the Marine Corps. And the thing I loved about real estate is the whole concept of the fact that it was mine, right? It was something that I can do. I can structure this any way that I wanted. I can make this business anything I wanted. And that's true. It was. And what I realized is that the way I had constructed it was awful. It was absolutely terrible. And so to kind of get into the story a little bit, I was laying on my back, flat on my back on a hospital bed for 3 days. It was day 3, and I'm laying on my back on a hospital bed from double pneumonia because I had almost worked myself to death. And I had 92 rental units that I had pieced together through a hodgepodge of creative financing, wheeling and dealing, a lot of off balance sheet type of financing, right? Contract sales stuff, and pieced this whole together. It was a $6 million real estate portfolio, and because I had basically had no business. It was no business. It was a guy who was a really busy guy with a side hustle. And because I had no infrastructure and no processes in place, I lost nearly all of it in about 8 months. I lost about $4.5 million of that portfolio in about 8 months. So that's the awful beginning of when I started to realize I needed to do something different.
Yeah. So you had to figure out a way to rethink everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I had to do. So, so as I'm sitting there thinking about like everything that my life was, how terrible my life was, I kind of got sitting, and it was funny. I tell this story real quick, but I'm sitting in the hospital, and this is the first day I'm in the hospital, and I had double pneumonia, and the hospitalist came in and she looked at me and she says, and I was 37 years old and I was otherwise in really good health. And she looked at me and she says, people who look like you do don't wind up in beds like this with double pneumonia. She said, something in your life is very, very wrong. And she's like, I don't know if it's, I didn't know if she thought I was, had something else going on, but she's like, you should not be, well, I don't know if it's stress or overwork or whatever, but people like you don't look, who look like you don't go, don't lay in a bed. And I was like, holy crap, like this is a wake up call that I had to start doing things differently. So this nurse came in a few minutes later and she said, she came in with this needle and she said, I need to give you a shot. Now I am not into needles at all, but, I said, okay. I said, well, I have to give you a shot in the stomach. I was like, no, you're not, And she said, well, I have to give you this shot in the stomach because you're going to be laying in bed for the next couple of days. And, it's going to get blood clots in your legs. I said, well, how about I just get up and move around? I mean, this thing you've got me hooked up to is on wheels. I can get up and move around. Right. And she says, okay. And she took her needle and she went away. I felt like I just told her, just take your toe and go home. But it's really funny because at that point in time, I realized that she was just operating off of a system. She was just doing what she was told. And so it kind of got me thinking as I'm sitting there, and I had nothing else to do but ruminate for 3 days because, in fact, at that time, I didn't even know how long I was going to be in the hospital. But I couldn't answer the phone. I couldn't take care of any of the problems that were needing to take care of. So it was that point in time that I had that time to sit there and kind of ruminate what were all the issues that were going on in my business and my life and everything else. And it kind of all landed in 3 different buckets. And the first bucket that things landed in was processes. I really didn't have anything written down. It was all up in here, right? Oh, I have to go make sure I pick up the rent from so-and-so on the 12th day of the month because that's when their money comes in from such and such. Right. Oh, and Bobby Sue, I have to go over there. And and I know their dog's name because I go over there all the time. And I have to pick up the rent every other Thursday from them before they go and buy their, spend it all on PBR. Right. Like all this stuff is all in my head. There was no way I could possibly replicate this, and do this. Well, that was the problem. So I had all these processes, but they were all in my head. Secondly, even if I did have help to run these processes, I didn't have anywhere to put them, right? There was no infrastructure of my business. I was running it off of a laptop that was in my truck, and that was my mobile office. And I had a printer, hooked up to a power inverter, and I thought that was so fancy, but it was efficient in some perverse way, I suppose, but it certainly wasn't very effective. And as I thought about this, I'm thinking, even if I had help, what was I going to do? Walk them into a room and yell, do work and then run away? Because it was, they didn't know my processes, right? I didn't even have a desktop computer. I didn't have a desk. I didn't have anywhere for them to go. I didn't have a phone system. I mean, my phone system looked like this, so, that was the problem. So I had no infrastructure. So no process, no infrastructure. And last, I had no real reason as to why I was doing this all in the first place. I didn't have a really clear enough. People call it your why, but I think it's different than that. I think it's deeper than that. I think it's, what was this whole purpose that I was here for? Was it really to truly work like a dog, like a slave for 22 hours a day? Certainly there had to be more for me in my life.
Yeah. So
really that's where I came down with this vision, that I really needed to do. So, even though it comes out really kind of handy in terms of VIP, that's how the vision infrastructure process, the VIP method, was born that I wrote about in my book, The Time Wealthy Investor 2.0.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Isn't it funny? And by funny, I mean, not funny, haha, but funny, odd, that entrepreneurship in general, and probably real estate and entrepreneurship specifically, people get into it for this desire to have freedom. And then ultimately, ironically, it can be exactly the opposite, right? It's more controlling of you than any of the other stuff you've been involved in. And yet at the same time, you're like, this seems like the raw materials are right there for me to have this independence of time and money and relationships and purpose and all that kind of stuff. Yet it's hard to grasp onto. So it sounds like you've kind of, I don't know, codified, however you want to pronounce that word.
We're being very fancy today. Yeah.
Yeah. Super fancy. Yeah. But an approach that kind of gives you sanity, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I'd love to say I came, it was written in the sky, VIP, in a letter, in clouds, whatever. It wasn't like that at all, but it kind of came to me, little bits and pieces where I really needed to get clarity in terms of what it was that I was trying to do. But it's interesting that I go through this with my students now. And a lot of times, especially early on, they're thinking, well, I don't want a job. That's why I want to get into the real estate business. And I said, okay, you don't want a job. I said, do me a favor. I said, do not think of a bowling pin. And they're like looking at me. And I said, what are you thinking about? They're like, bowling pin, And I'm like, okay, is the bowling pin white? I said, yeah. I said, did I say think of a white bowling pin? No. They're infusing all this extra crap on this bowling pin. And I'm thinking, you're probably even thinking about the little red thing around the neck of the bowling pin, aren't you? And they're like, yeah, and because our brain doesn't process, it processes subjects. It doesn't process all the other stuff around it. It's like, all it sees is job. So and I know that sounds really, really basic. And maybe, some of your listeners have heard this before, but when you have to process it in the positive, that's why vision has to come first. Mm-hmm. Because when you're looking at vision, vision is specifically what you want to accomplish. And it has absolutely nothing to do with business. It really has nothing to do with, you can have a vision that involves business. As what I do with Landlord Coach, I absolutely love it. I just came off of a weekend mastermind with my students, and Saturday I was wiped out, but Sunday I was jazzed. I had an amazing, amazing weekend with them, and it doesn't seem like work to me. Mm-hmm. But you can have that as part of your vision for sure, but it's not the only thing. I have lunch with my bride every weekday, and and that's done more for my marriage than any vacation or, date night or whatever else it is, because we sit at home and, eat salads and watch, get freaked out over Criminal Minds rerun or, and then go back to our day. Right.
Yeah.
But that to me is part of my vision. And that happens, that only happens through intention, through being deliberate, because I want to have a closer relationship with my gal. I want to have a closer relationship with my God, my sons, right? These are all pieces of my vision that are very, very, very well defined. Yeah. And if it's just like, well, I'll do that someday. Well, last time I checked, I've checked a couple times. Someday's not a day on the calendar. It just never seems to come around.
Yeah, that's for sure. Sometimes when people hear the word thoughtful, they say, well, what does thoughtful real estate mean? And I say, I think it means two things. It means intentionality, just being very deliberate with what you want out of your business, out of your life, out of each individual deal, each individual person, seller you might be working with. And then the second thing, though, is relationship. It's a people orientation, a desire to achieve our success by way of working well with others. And so, we've kind of talked a little bit now about the intentionality side of things, of designing the business to facilitate the life you want to have. But I also know that we have this common spirit about the idea of having a people-oriented approach. And while it's so funny, it sounds so trite to say, oh, we're in a people business, but it is 1,000% true from the perspective of real estate acquisition, the way that we do it here. But I know it also applies to you and how you sort of advise people to be interacting with tenants and to form those relationships. Can you speak a little bit to the people orientation on the property management sort of side of the equation?
Yeah, 100%. And just like your listeners, they're entering into relationships with people. The last time I checked, an empty building does not pay rent. Who is that paid by? It's someone who is paying rent by going out and being in the world and generating revenue to pay you, right? Pay your rent money. And generally I'm assuming that's what your listeners are doing.
Yeah.
But that side of that people orientation is very, very important. And this is why, whenever I say, the system piece, so in the VIP method, the system piece is not the V, it's the I and the P, it's the infrastructure and the process. And, even though people may say, well, I just like giving that personal touch, right? That's why everybody has my cell phone number, right? Well, and that's okay, I guess. But, let me ask you something. Jeff, do you have a favorite restaurant that you maybe like to go to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Do you know the owner's phone number and home address?
No, I don't.
Do you know their name?
I don't know that either. No.
Okay. I'm shocked, Jeff. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a little shocked. Why not? Because, you eat there, you spend money there. And if you had a bad meal, gosh darn it, you should be able to call them at home whenever you feel like it. Right?
Yeah, right.
And saying it, of course, I'm teasing. It's ridiculous even to think of that. But why then do on this people side of the business, why are you handing out private personal information to residents? These are your business associates. And it's the reason, the point I'm making here is that there's boundaries. That restaurant owner has boundaries. And it doesn't mean that they're not well taken care of. In fact, it may be your favorite because they make you feel like a big shot when you go in there. And the food is always very consistent. And consistency is what people care about. Consistency in the business. All they want you to do is do what you say, right? You go in there and that's fine. You go the extra mile, but if you're not even doing the basics, you're going to struggle, and you're going to struggle in whatever business that you're in. Yeah. So, in your case, you probably go there to this restaurant over and over because your experience is very consistent.
Right.
So what aspect that I look at, and if you think of, if anybody, I don't know if you have ever read Persuasion by Robert Cialdini, the second component in the book is commitment and consistency, because we human beings want to be consistent, and we view consistency as a positive trait, right? So consistency is really all they're looking for, and you can give consistency through a good system, and that system just needs to be, that's where the infrastructure and process part comes from.
Yeah.
So that's why I say if you can design a system that delivers that and is still personable, it doesn't need to be a robotic thing where you never talk to a human being again. When I say system, it just means, okay, they're being put into a process where they're being handled very consistently.
Yeah, I love that. I think that a lot of people, especially newer landlords, in their mind, there's this sort of like binary dynamic where they say, either I have to treat these people like they're my cousin, or I have to, it's such an arm's length kind of thing. And I'm sure you've seen the following come up many times, but I see, in Facebook groups and forums and stuff, people say, oh, I'm going to house hack this triplex. I'm going to live in one unit. I'm renting out the other two, but I'm so nervous about, dealing with the tenants. I don't think I've got the heart for it. What should I do? And inevitably somebody comments, I think you probably know where I'm going with this. They comment and they say, oh, just tell them you're the manager, you're not the owner. And that then they won't look to you. They won't hold you accountable for making decisions. And I just look at that and I get a gag reflex. I'm like, are you kidding me? You're too, I guess, afraid to build a proper relationship that balances both being empathetic and businesslike to the point where now you're going to build a foundation of your relationship with these people based on a lie. And it just always gets to me. Now, I guess I'm making a big assumption, Mark, here that you see it kind of like I do, and I could be this could go off the rails in a second. But what is your take?
I'm out.
Okay. It's been nice talking to you. Thanks.
Yeah. No, I look at it a little differently. I agree with you. I don't like the whole manager aspect of it, but I do want to put boundaries in place with those people and say, hey, if you are going to live in that other side, I think it's really important that they understand what the processes are. And the last thing that I want them to do is to come and knock on my door, at 2 a.m. Like, there's no reason ever for you to come knock on my door, literally ever. Like, and that's where the boundary part comes in. I think people maybe are confusing that because it's like, hey, I live over there, and just letting you know, like, I'm not the one you call. There's a number that you call, which rings to somebody who handles the phone calls for you. It'd be no different. You may as well knock on the other neighbor's door, because there's no reason to knock on my door unless the building's on fire. Then I would appreciate it. But other than that, there's not any reason to contact me. I will make sure things are handled. But yeah, I never appreciate people stepping up in that way, where people are going to start in a relationship where they're not being honest. Yeah. And I've heard that. And even times I might have said that just because, people are like, well, I really don't have I never budgeted. And this is where the cash flow analysis is really important, that when you're doing your cash flow analysis, these are the sorts of things that you need to budget for in advance.
Yeah.
Right. Because and this is a point that I would like, I think it's important to make, that, as you're doing your cash flow analysis, every line item that you don't budget for becomes a job you create for yourself.
Good point.
So if you don't budget for an after hours, VA to handle your phone calls, then guess what? You just created whatever it would cost, $100 a month job for yourself.
Yeah.
Now, if you amortize that out over 24 hours over 30 days, I don't know, that's like not a lot of money. But my point is that, you just created a 50-cent an hour job for yourself where you never can step away. I hope to God that that's not what you did when you bought yourself a job that was literally paying you 50 cents an hour.
Yeah.
Or whatever it amortizes out to be.
Yeah.
So
before we hit record, you and I were doing a little warm up riffing there, and we talked about something I think related to this, and I think is a really important distinction: the difference between empathy and sympathy when dealing with tenants, and also when dealing with sellers and stuff too. But in this case, tenants.
Yeah.
Can you share just a little bit about kind of what you think the distinction between those is, and why is it so important to understand which is which?
Yeah, and this is my truth. So don't, I don't want someone beating me up with a photograph of what Webster says, but this is my truth. So sympathy is about you. Empathy is about them.
Mm-hmm.
And because if you know anything about the communication pie, 55% of how we communicate our feelings is through body language. Right, 38 is through our tonality, meaning how we say things, like what's tone of voice. But only 7% are words. Only 7% are words. And people think, well, if it's only 7% are words, the words don't matter that much. Quite the contrary. If only 7% comes through our words, then we need to be careful about the words that we're choosing. Right, where if someone calls me with a problem, right, their cat needs a whiskerectomy, and the vet won't let them, pay it over time. That mean veterinarian, right? And when Mr. Whiskers has to get his whiskerectomy, and that's going to cost $2,000, and you say, "Oh my gosh, that's awful," right? That's sympathy. When you say, "Oh my gosh, I understand how that could be upsetting to you," how do you plan on handling that? That's empathy.
Yeah.
And my words might sound pretty much the same, but they're very different meanings.
Yeah.
And one takes on their pain as their, now you've created a drama. Now you've got inside the drama triangle where you're the hero to their antagonist and them being the victim. Now you've just completed the triangle being their hero, and now you've got drama, and now you have no one else to blame but yourself.
Yeah.
So the empathy piece to me is very, very, it's very important to make sure that you're putting it back on them. And one of the things that I learned, a good friend of mine who has a restaurant near Purdue's campus, she said something which I absolutely love. She said, this might not be your fault, but it is your problem to handle.
Mm-hmm.
So, how I might be able to help you with it, but how do you plan on handling it?
Yeah.
And it was one of those things that it puts it straight back on them.
Yeah. I think that to me is a great summary. And that's how I think about it too. I think empathy is an appreciation for the human condition, right? The appreciation for the human experience, and like,
yeah,
oh boy, that does sound hard. I'm sorry you're going through that. But then there's like, I feel sorry for you, which is, and to me, that's a really slippery slope, because if you start feeling sorry for somebody,
yep,
everybody's got a list a mile long of stuff you could feel sorry for them about. And then pretty soon, like, yeah, you are kind of in charge of, their well-being. And that's, you can't really recover from that if you go down that road.
No, you're, I can't tell you how many times I have, I'll be at an event, I might be speaking and saying, what kind of problems do people have? And they're almost always universally, getting residents that won't pay, getting that they destroy the units, those sorts of things. But every now and again, I'll get one that's, well, I've got this, family that's living in there and, and they're trashing the place. They've got 3 kids. And I just, I know I shouldn't have rented to them. I knew I shouldn't have rented to them, but I felt sorry for the kids. Yeah. And I can't tell you, I've done that. This isn't judgment. This is confession. I've done that. I'm looking at the kids that are standing there with their sad face and their no shoes and their, their dirty clothes. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, and I'm looking at the car. They're probably living out of the car. And I'm like, oh man, these are the sorts of situations. And I'm feeling like, like I feel like I need to save them in some way. And unfortunately, it's just, you have to be able to put that emotional barrier. And if you don't have that ability to do that, this is why you hire this out and you have a process to make sure that there's people. You putting them in a house you're not doing anything for them. You're actually hurting them. And it's not even a question of enabling. It's like, okay, so they're going to live in a place for 2 months and destroy that place. And now what? Now they're going to be evicted. Yeah. And that's going to make it even harder for them to find a really good place at some point. Yeah. So yeah, it's on and on, but
yeah, absolutely. I just think that threading the needle somewhere between having empathy, but also being businesslike is, to me, that's the strike zone. That's what's right, right down the middle. That it's easier said than done, though. But I guess one thing I found myself saying many times, I've thought it many times, and I've said it many times too, is to an employee, to a tenant, to anybody in those circumstances, I might say, I can't promise that I will always tell you what you want to hear, but I can promise that I will always tell it to you with respect and compassion. And in most ways, to me, that sort of addresses that idea of like, I'm going to be empathetic, even if I have to say that like, you're not welcome to live here any longer, or the rent is changing, or you've made this violation, or whatever it might be, we can do it. Like, to me, empathy comes across not necessarily what you say, but the way that you say it. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we could probably talk for hours about this topic, I guess, but
yeah. No, well, I think you bring up a very valid point, though, is that I don't think it's like in terms of negotiation, with your folks and doing deals, the non-traditional way, we'll call it, I suppose. I did a lot of deals that way. And, but even when I'm negotiating, whether you're dealing with a resident that's being a pill or whatever, you never want to leave someone without their dignity. Mm-hmm. There's no point in that. You might need to make a point, but you don't need to make a point to where they have lost any shred of dignity in the transaction. And you really don't need to do that. And there's even times where I'll say, look, I'm not here to beat you up. I'm really not. I just need to make sure you understand where my position is. Yeah. And, and even though I know, and there's times where I'm like, I don't need to, prove that you've got 3 dogs living in this property, even though maybe neighbors have confirmed anything. We don't even need to discuss that. I'm just saying, let's start a conversation where we can be honest with one another. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you what, even though they know I know, and they don't know how I know, the fact that I'm just going to sit there and go and let them off the hook, I build so much more rapport with them at that point that they're like, you know what? Yeah, I do have 3 dogs and I've got 2 chickens and a ferret. I'm like, I have 2 chickens and a ferret. Where'd that come from? Mm-hmm. Right. I'm like, man, stop talking. I don't want to hear anymore. Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's but leaving people with their dignity is always something that I think is needed more in this industry.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it too. Okay, so one more sort of broad topic I'd love to get your take on, which is something I think probably a lot of our listeners think about often, which is how do I decide whether I should be self-managing or hiring this out, right? Our show's called Racking Up Rentals. If you're racking them up, at some point, there's going to be a lot of things to deal with. I would say generally our audience here is probably, if they're appreciating this message of, we buy properties by sitting in people's living rooms and having very personal conversations without, intermediaries. That also might suggest to them like, maybe I should manage my own properties too. But how does a person make a really, I guess, informed, intelligent, educated decision about which path to go down?
I think the best thing to do is to educate yourself in terms of what a well-running business looks like that's like that. And the irony is that even though I have the moniker landlord coach, the last thing in the world that I want people to be are landlords. Mm-hmm. I want them to be business owners. I want them to be investors. And if you're operationally bound, then all you've done is create a job for yourself. So, and some people are like, well, I don't have the tolerance for that. I'm too impatient, or I'm too relaxed, or whatever that is. But all of that emotional stuff can be handled with systems, in my opinion. And I don't like evicting people. I mean, that's terrible that I have to do that. I mean, we had an eviction not too long ago with a really good guy, but I'm like, man, I just can't extend you any more credit. This is unfortunate. And he totally got it. We're going to work with the guy, on the back end, but he couldn't live in the property anymore. But as a result, he left the place really, really in good shape. And, it sucked. It was a sucky situation. He was a good guy, but he got hurt and couldn't keep it up. And, that was the thing. But those are the sorts of, even if you're not necessarily thinking, well, I got to be a hard screw, on these people and don't take anything. That's not the people orientation side of the business.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, well, if I'm not like that, and I hear this argument all the time, if I'm not like that, then I'm never going to get paid rent. Mm-hmm. And I would ask then, is that the avatar that you really want to be working with?
Yeah.
I was working with that avatar they weren't living paycheck to paycheck. They were living moment to moment.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to deal with that avatar anymore. I mean, this, it was awful, dealing with very low end rentals. And it was very, very tough market to be in. So my suggestion is to educate yourself as best you can. And I'm not trying to plug my book. I'm really not. Actually, you can get it on my website, for $8 and just cover the shipping. But I'm just not selflessly plugging that. It's just that, but that book goes through completely from front to back the systems. And it's the reason I'm telling you that is because there was a guy who he used to be in the NFL, and he bought a bunch of rental properties, and but he had them. He was in partners with someone else, and they kind of managed them, right? And he read the book, and he goes, "Man, that book was so eye-opening." He goes, "I didn't realize even half the stuff that you did." And I'm like, "Really? That's cool." He goes, "Yeah, I am never getting into that business," because he realized then what it would all take. Yeah. So I'm not suggesting that, I'm not trying to plug it. Trust me. If you know anything about book sales, you don't get rich on, selling books for $8. But I think that the message in there is so important because it really does educate you on terms of how to do that. And if nothing else, if you are going to hire a property manager, or really if you're in any other business, that vision, infrastructure, process, method, when you look at that, now you have a lens to look through when you're looking for a property manager. And you're going to say, "Oh, really? How do you handle your after hours maintenance calls?" And it's like, "Oh, well, we have a guy, on call." "Oh, really? You have a guy with a cell phone that can get left in the truck, that could just not ring, right? That happens. What if he falls asleep and it's on silent? And meanwhile, I've got 3 inches of sewer in my property, and you're not taking care of my resident. Like, that's not okay. You need redundancies and things like that." So, all these different pieces of infrastructure. So to answer that question, it's not a straightforward one, but it's just, it's one that I think educating yourself in terms of how a business looks, and you being the business owner, not the operator, I think that's the lens that most people should look through when they're trying to make that decision.
Yeah, that makes great sense. And I just want to sort of reiterate and highlight the connection you mentioned there between understanding what your sort of tenant avatar will be based on your investing strategy, and like that what you're acquiring and then the experience you will have with those tenants afterwards. Those are very related topics. And
Yeah.
It makes me think part of my philosophy definitely is erring on the side of quality. I don't necessarily mean luxury penthouse condos everywhere, but I do mean good locations, well-maintained properties, where the tenants themselves, like the full market rents, all those things. I think, well, they sort of, I believe, attract a higher quality tenant, but it also projects to that higher quality tenant. We run things well here. It's a relatively tightly run ship. And like, if you're the kind of person who's looking to, get away with some stuff, this might not be the right sandbox to be scratching around in.
That's a great way to put that. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. And there's a reason why, if you go onto those Facebook marketplace forums, there's a reason why individual renters, they'll go out and they'll specifically say, we're looking for a private landlord to rent from.
Yeah.
And it might just be my paradigm, but I think that they're asking that because they know they can get away with stuff.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. So I do want you to shamelessly plug the book. Tell us again what it's called and the website where people can go check it out.
Yeah, it's the Time Wealthy Investor 2.0. If you go to landlordcoach.com and go to there's a link there. You can just go to the video section. The website's going to be changing here soon, so I don't want to give like a direct link. But if you go to the website, it will not be hard to find. It's going to be I'm getting ready to change it. So I'm afraid by the time you guys see it, or if you see it, anybody sees it on replay, it may be different. But it's the Time Wealthy Investor 2.0. I had an original version, which was the Time Wealthy Investor, but I updated some things and re-released it back in 2019. So yeah, the Time Wealthy Investor 2.0. All I ask is that you just pay shipping, and you can get it directly from my website.
Okay. Awesome. And if people want to reach out to you in any other way, just go to the website too. Is that the best path?
Landlordcoach.com is the website, of course. My email is mark@landlordcoach.com. For those of you who are on Facebook, you can reach out to me that way. But emails is good, mark@landlordcoach.com. And also I've got a YouTube channel. You can reach out to me any number of ways. But that's probably the best, is just drop me an email and I'll be happy to engage with you and help you out with anything that I can possibly help you out with. I think that because we are a very large population of, we're at the largest population ever. Actually, we have roughly 120 million renters out there. We have the largest population, not only in percentage, but also in number of residents out there, of renters. I think we are obligated to provide a good service. Otherwise, Big Brother, Uncle Sam's going to step in and tell us how to run our business. And that is absolutely not what we want. So if I can help you guys out and do things right, I am more than happy to help you any way that I can.
Wonderful. Awesome. Well, it's been fun chatting. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview. I really felt like there was great alignment kind of between the way Mark approaches property management and the way that we approach acquisition. And I think we all know that if you don't have kind of alignment between those two things, there's going to be pain kind of associated with a disconnect between the way you're buying properties and the way you are ultimately managing them. So grateful to Mark for being on today's episode. And that's a wrap for today's episode. So again, show notes can be found at thoughtfulre.com/E91. Please do us a big favor by hitting the subscribe button in your podcast app. And please take a second to rate and review the show on whatever platform you like to listen on. Did you know that we have a Facebook group for thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs too? It's called Rental Portfolio Wealth Builders, and we'd love to have you join us over there. Just go to group.thoughtfulre.com and it will redirect you right to that page within Facebook. Hey, if you like this episode, please take a screenshot of it and post that screenshot to Instagram. You can tag us. We are at Thoughtful Real Estate. We love to see that. I'll catch you in the next episode. Until then, this is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur signing off. Thanks for listening to Racking Up Rentals, where we build long-term wealth by being win-win deal makers. Remember, solve the person to unlock the deal and solve the financing to unlock the profits.